Chapter 201 Ask, a third more for a monthly ticket. Against the wall, looking at the dark across the corridor, Klein instinctively held her breath. What is the captain doing? Captain, what's wrong? He's drinking blood? Did he have early signs of losing control? One by one, his mind is a mess, and he can't think effectively at all. After more than 10 seconds, Klein bit his lower tooth and quietly moved to the stairs with the help of the clown's control of his body. Then, he deliberately stepped up and walked back, and once again came to Mrs. Sharon's bedroom door. The line of sight. Klein saw the captain standing there, wrapped in black cloth layer upon layer with a seal. 3-0271. With a calm expression, quiet gray eyes, and a clean face, what he saw just now seems to be just an illusion. Out of the corner of his eye, Klein saw that Cohen Lee's body didn't add anything unusual, and it was still the same as before. He took a deep breath and asked, "Captain, how can I confirm whether those servants are asleep? It seems that it is impossible to judge accurately by second sight alone. They will have different emotional reactions and present corresponding colors because of dreaming." Dunn Smith held the psychic's mirror and was silent for a few seconds. His voice was hoarse and said, "Sorry, I forgot. I made too many mistakes tonight. You don't have to check, I'll confirm." He raised a hand, pressed the eyebrows, and then closed his eyes, letting the invisible ripples ripple to other rooms and to the first floor. Whether you are asleep or not is clearly visible in front of the nightmare. Klein stared at this scene, slowly lowered his eyes, and bit the inside of his lips. "Captain, you are really just trying to distract me. What the hell are you doing? Do you know what you are doing?" He suddenly turned his head and looked at the window, only to see the scarlet moon hanging high, as if it had not changed for thousands of years. Calm down for a while. Klein to pick up tarot cards, revolvers, semi-high silk hats, and other items as a cover, and carefully examine the bodies of Cohen Lee and Mrs. Sharon. They remained the same as when they died, and their skin became pale at a faster rate than ordinary people, with a little blue. It's a little strange. They seem to be missing something. It's not something specific, but a feeling. Klein said nothing to himself, only feeling that the cool breeze blowing from the broken window made his hair stand on end. At this moment, Dunn opened his eyes and said in a low voice, "Everyone is still asleep, but a few are close to waking up." "That's good. That's good." Klein looked at the captain and didn't know what he was answering. Dunn looked around and said, "You deal with the things at the scene, and then go to the nearest police station to get someone to come over. Well, by the way, go back to Zotland Street and ask Fry to help." Klein took a deep look at the captain and nodded with clenched teeth. With Dunn's help, he quickly handled the scene and left Mrs. Sharon's house by the main entrance. Through the garden and outside, Klein couldn't help but look back again, only to see the small building still crawling quietly in the dark, without any light. He turned around heavily, and, according to the impression, he quickly found the nearest police station. This is the common sense that every night watchman must remember. Dong dong dang dang. Klein knocked on the iron gate. Before long, the police in the rotating night carried lanterns, crossed the small courtyard, opened the door, and looked puzzled. "What can I do for you?" Klein can't squeeze out any expression. Calm face. Took out his own certificate and opened it in front of the policeman. "There's a serious murder at number 15 Olsner Street. Call your partner to help at once." The policeman filed a lantern, looked at the certificate carefully, then put his legs together and raised his hand to salute. "Yes, sir. Deal with this matter." Klein returned to Zotland Street by taxi. Above all the way, he sat in the dark carriage. His thoughts were messy and divergent. Cornley is dead. I remember, he just got engaged. His parents are still alive. What the hell was the captain doing just now? Is he thirsty for blood? Or, there is another purpose. His memory is still so poor, and there is no obvious improvement, which shows that he has no early signs of losing control. However, he has known the acting method for some time. Does the lack of memory improvement also indicate that there are some problems in the dark? No. It must be that the captain is still groping for how to play the nightmare. By the way, one of the important reasons for Cohen Lee's death is the seal 3-0271, which was given to him by the captain. What am I thinking? At that time, it was an inevitable choice. It was also the captain's proposal to use the seal 3-0271. Calm down, calm down. Don't think blindly and don't wait, lest the situation get worse. And so on. Send a letter to Ms. Daly to see if she knows what this situation represents. Even if she doesn't know the specific answer, she will certainly understand the dangers involved and inform the temple in time. This should nip the problem in the bud and let the captain return to normal. No, the captain doesn't necessarily have a problem. Maybe I misunderstood something, depending on what Ms. Daly said. When the taxi arrived at number 36 Sotland Street, Klein had already thought about the countermeasures and made a decision, and was no longer as flustered and at a loss as before. He trudged up the stairs to the door of Blackthorn Security Company, took out the key, and opened the door to the familiar arrangement, and the familiar scene in front of him have made him feel a lot more secure, just like the feeling every time he has. Something to find the captain. Taking a deep breath, Klein came to the night watchman's recreation room and saw Fry reading a book alone under the light of a gas lamp. He looked sideways at Klein, and his cold and gloomy face showed obvious concern and tension. "What's the matter? Where are the captain and Cohenly?" Klein, voice dumb, replied, "Cohenly died in the hands of Mrs. Sharon. We all made mistakes. The captain is there to guard the scene and let you help." Before departure, Dunn told Fry about the specific situation and told him that if they didn't come back within 2 hours, they would immediately send a telegram to the temple. Similarly, because they want to apply for the seal 3-0271 and enter the Chinese Gate at night, Luo Yao of the rotating guard room also knows what the task they're going to perform according to the internal regulations of the night watchman. The captain's permission must be obtained to open the Chinese Gate at night. Fry hesitated for a moment, sighed in a low voice, and drew a crimson moon on his chest. He put on his coat and hat and walked towards the door. When he passed Klein, he suddenly said in a low voice, "You don't need to blame yourself. Making mistakes is something that can never be avoided. We always trust our teammates." Well, Klein closed his eyes, and his eyes seemed to blur. He and Fry first went underground, told Luo Yao, then locked the door of Blackthorn Security Company and hurried to Mrs. Sharon's house in Orsna Street. By the time they moved back to Cohenly's body and Mrs. Sharon's ferocious body with half a head missing, it was past midnight. Dunn, wearing a thin black trench coat, stood at the door of the morgue and silently looked inside. He only turned his head to Klein for a long time. "Go home first. You have just experienced a fierce battle. You must be very tired." "Okay." Klein didn't refuse. He sipped his mouth, looked at the captain, quietly left the Blackthorn Security Company and took a taxi back to Daffodil Street. Like the last process, he easily entered his bedroom and really locked the door. Taking out the silver dagger for the ceremony, Klein created the spiritual wall that blocked the room, then sat down at the desk, spread out the paper, lifted the pen, and eagerly wrote, "Dear Miss Daly, I found that there was something wrong with the captain. Recently, he quietly..." At this point, Klein suddenly stopped with a pen. His head was blank, and he didn't know how to pick it up and how to describe it. Bang! He flung away his pen, grabbed the paper in front of him, kneaded it into a ball, and then thumped the desktop. Dong's voice echoed. Klein closed his eyes and put his hand over his face. He didn't move for a long time, just like turning into a statue. After 5 minutes, he sighed, put down his right hand, lit the waste paper with spirituality, and watched it turn into ashes and fall into the trash. Can it organize the idea? Klein spread out new paper, put pen to paper, and rewrote, "Dear Ms. Daly, we just finished a task and sadly lost a teammate. The specific situation is this. At that time, it occurred to me that my current level of second sight could not confirm whether the servants were asleep, and divination was very troublesome, so I went back and planned to consult the captain. At this time, I saw the captain crouching next to Cohenly's body through the mirror, with dark red blood around his mouth. I don't know what happened, and I don't know what the captain is in. I hope you can give me an answer." After writing, Klein read it through with a heavy heart and folded the letter paper. Then, he decorated the ceremony, opened the second sight, summoned Daly's messenger, and summoned the strange face with no eyes, no nose, and only mouth, looking at the spit-out bright red tongue full of irregular fangs and 5 tiny pale fingers at the top of the tongue. Klein silently handed the letter over. When everything returned to normal, he sat down again and continued to write letters. This time, he asked Mr. Ask. In a recent mission, my boss had some abnormal situations. He pushed me aside and crouched next to the body of his teammate, with dark red blood around his mouth. In your memory, whether there have been similar things. How can I help my boss? P.S. This chapter is counted as June, and it will continue the night on July 1st, so please get a guaranteed monthly ticket. Chapter 202 confirm the situation. The first more commutation ticket. Folding the writing paper, Klein took out a brass whistle, put it to his mouth and blew a sigh. Silently, he saw the illusory and hazy bones on the desk being thrown out one by one, turned into fountains, and pieced together into a huge monster. It was still close to 4 meters, still covered with light, and its head was still drilled out of the roof, which seemed to be no different from the past. Klein shook his wrist, threw the letter up, and saw the bones monster firmly grasp it. He blew the bronze whistle again, and witnessed the messenger disintegrating into illusory bones, one after another falling like rain and disappearing on the surface of the desk. After all this, Klein settled down a lot, but he didn't stop trying. He moved his chair back, stood up, took 4 steps counterclockwise, and entered the fog. The majestic palaces and ancient mottled long tables came into his eyes, as if they had remained unchanged for thousands of years. Klein sat in the high-backed chair belonging to the fool, silently untied the pendulum in the cuff of his left wrist, and presented a tan parchment and a round-bellied pen. He's going to read the captain's fortune tonight. Thinking for a moment, Klein wrote the first divination statement. Dunsmith's abnormality will put me in danger. In the occult, divination involving one's own safety is the most difficult to be disturbed by external forces, which belongs to spiritual instinct. In other words, Klein can get more accurate results in divination involving his own safety as long as it is not particularly powerful interference. This is why he knew that Mrs. Sharon had the ability to interfere with divination before, and whether there was any danger in divination for the task. He knew very well that Mrs. Sharon was not strong enough to influence such divination now. In order to determine the situation of Captain Dunsmith, he decided to eliminate all interference and divine on the fog. Holding the pendulum in his left hand, Klein recited the divination sentence 7 times, closed his eyes, and entered a state of meditation. After a few seconds of stability, he opened his eyes, and the color of the darkened eyes has returned to normal. He looked at the topaz pendant, and his heart sank gradually because the pendulum was turning clockwise, with a large amplitude and a slow speed. This shows that the answer is yes. This shows that Dunsmith's abnormality will put him in danger, and the danger is not low. Close your eyes. Klein erased the previous content and wrote a new divination statement. The reason why Dunsmith is abnormal. He put away the topaz pendant, leaned back in the chair, and entered the dream with the help of meditation while reciting the divination sentence. In that gray fantasy world, he saw nothing, found nothing, except gray or gray. This shows that the information is insufficient, and the divination failed. Klein opened his eyes and looked at the parchment on the bronze long table, whispering bitterly and helplessly. Suddenly, he felt a strong fatigue and understood that this was the result of fierce fighting, continuous use of rituals, and repeated divination. Wrapped in spirituality, Klein fell into the fog and returned to the real world. Throughout the night, he had several nightmares. At the end of the dream, it was either Cohen Lee who vomited his guts out or Dunsmith whose mouth was covered with dark red blood. The next morning, Klein, who was about to take the rotating Cheney gate, arrived at Blackthorn Security Company in advance. At this time, Luoshan, Mrs. Oriana, and other civil servants have not yet gone to work. Klein crossed the partition, looked at the open door, and saw Dunsmith in the captain's office. Dunn took off his coat, wearing only a white shirt and a black vest. He was sitting in his seat with a cup of coffee in his hand, staring at the wall in front of him. His hair is slightly dry, his gray eyes are dim, and his hardline face is obviously gaunt. Even a captain who has experienced similar things many times, it is unbearable to lose 2 teammates in a short period of time. Klein's heart is sour, and Horan in his mind emerges from the broken mirror, and Dunn's half-crouched body and face stained with dark blood emerged. Klein suddenly gritted his teeth, tilted his head, and looked to one side. 10 seconds later, he controlled his expression and reached out and knocked on the door of the captain's office. Knock, knock. Knocked, Dunn put down his coffee cup and his gray eyes became quiet again. He silently took a deep breath away. I have reported the matter to the temple, and they have also made a preliminary reply. The church compensated Cohen Lee's family for £3,000, and the police department gave a pension of £1,000, a total of £4,000, which is a wealth that most middle-class people can't save for life. Cohen Lee's weekly salary is £7, and his annual salary is £364. Including bonuses and extra income, it can reach at least £380, and £4,000 is equivalent to his income for 10 years. Such a wealth can earn at least £200 a year, which can barely make up for the damage caused by Cohen Lee's death to his family. There is only so much we can do. The Church of the Goddess of Night is still very conscientious in this respect. Dunn pulled off the neckline and said in a low voice, "Go underground and replace Luo Yao." Okay. Klein nodded slightly. He turned around and walked to the door, and heard the captain's almost soliloquized supplement. "We will send Cohen Lee home later. Send Cohen Lee home. His father, his mother, his brothers and sisters, his fiancée. What kind of reaction will there be?" Klein's heart is tight, but he is a little glad that he doesn't need to face that kind of sadness. He knew that this was an escape mentality, but he was really afraid to see Cohen Lee's parents' grief-stricken eyes and his fiancée's soulless performance, afraid to witness their expressions of hiding complaints, and afraid to hear the frequent sobs. Accelerated pace. Klein came to the door of Cheney's and completed the handover with Luo Yao in silence. He sat in the watchroom, took out his silver pocket watch from time to time, and saw the time pass by. I don't know how long it took. Klein's ear suddenly sounded the voice of illusory cascade. He looked at the back of the hand with 4 black spots, and understood that it was Justice, hanging upside down, or the sun praying to himself. However, he couldn't respond in time, so he had to endure until the prompt was over, and then he prayed and went home the next morning. As soon as Klein took out the key and opened the door, he saw Bella, the maid, wiping the dining table, while his sister Melissa and his brother Benson walked down the stairs in their respective clothes. "Didn't you just go to Mass last week?" Klein asked a little strangely. Benson smiled and said, "I can understand the memory of a man who stayed up all night." Ah. Klein is more at a loss. Today is the first day of booking for the Count's return. Melissa explained voluntarily. Klein took the forehead, conveniently took off his hat. "I was so busy these days that I forgot about it. Especially these 3 days." He added with a sigh. Melissa saw his one eye with concern. "Your breakfast is in the kitchen. Go to bed after eating." Benson and I thought that since we were going out, we would go to St. Selena's Church to attend Mass. Okay. Klein waved goodbye to his brother and sister, had a simple breakfast, and went back to his bedroom. Getting ready, he went retrograde 4 steps into the fog, and saw that the crimson stars corresponding to Justice and upside down were expanding and contracting unrealistically. Stretching out his right hand and spreading spirituality, Klein saw a vague picture in front of him, and the plea of Miss Justice rang out from his ear. "I pray for your listening. Because of what happened in Chi Lin Gus, my father hired an extraordinary person to protect me, and there was surveillance in the dark that I didn't know. I finally found an opportunity to pray to you. I want to take time off for next week's party, and I believe these will soon fade away." Klein subconsciously glanced at the vague picture, saw the diffuse fog, saw the giant bathtub that seemed to be rippling water waves, and saw Miss Justice wrapped in a bath towel. He withdrew his eyes and began to listen to the prayer of hanging upside down. The description of the other party is different from Justice, but he prayed for the same thing. And he also asked for leave because of the residual influence of the Chi Lin Gus incident. Klein slightly and respectively responded to their prayers. "I see." Then, he gave the crimson star corresponding to the sun an idea. The upcoming party is temporarily cancelled. The City of Silver, Derek Berg is listening to the teaching in the training ground, and the sky above him is still dark, and a flash of lightning illuminates all from time to time. Suddenly, he saw a flower in front of him, the thick fog, the ancient palace like the giant's residence, and the fool sitting high in the depths of the fog. The upcoming party is temporarily cancelled. The voice is still echoing, and everything in front of Dirk has returned to normal. He is not surprised by this magic, because Mr. Fool reminds him in this way before every party. Dirk subconsciously looked up at the woman in front of her, a member of the 6-member delegation of Bayin City and Lovia, the shepherd. This terrible strong man is constantly changing with a smile and coldness, and tells every teenager present that they will join the patrol team next to clear the dark. Monsters nearby, which is no longer training, that Elder Loya didn't find anything unusual. Her state is getting more and more strange, because there is an evil spirit equal to the high-order strong in her grazing soul. Dirk thinking, divergent thinking. Klein went back to the bedroom, lay on the bed, and soon fell asleep, dreaming about what happened these days. Suddenly, he felt that he was being shaken by someone and suddenly woke up. When he opened his eyes, Klein saw a huge hand with bones. The giant hand paused, threw the writing paper on the bed, and then disappeared. Mr. Ask's reply? Klein suddenly picked up the writing paper. P.S. First, ask for a guaranteed monthly ticket, chapter 203 heterogeneous. The second, more commutation ticket. Klein looked forward to spreading the writing paper in fear and trembling, and read Ask's reply. The scene you described reminds me of some possibilities. Vampires and aliens. Natural vampires were close to extinction before dragons and giants withdrew from the stage of history, and then they were discovered occasionally. The vampires we usually discussed in folk legends were closer to the extraordinary. I remember that there was a way to name a certain sequence of potions as vampires. If your boss is already in a state of semi-madness, he may have taken this potion by mistake. 2 different ways of potions are mixed, and semi-madness is the inevitable result. Well, I vaguely remember that the Dark Knight approach, which is what you said, can be exchanged with the Death approach and the Giant approach in high sequence, but this does not include vampires. Of course, you can't rule out the possibility that your boss consciously accepts it. After all, vampires can have a long life, excellent physique, and excellent appearance. Compared with these benefits, the semi-crazy state is not unacceptable. Klein looked dazed for a moment, but I didn't expect Mr. Ask to provide such useful information. The Death approach refers to the corpse receiver approach, which can be interchanged with the sleepless approach in high sequence. This is a secret I learned from Russell's diary before, but unexpectedly, they can also be interchanged with the Giant approach in sequence 4 and later. The Giant approach is the one mastered by Silver City, which is now the God of War approach. I have always suspected, well, the Diary of Roselle the Great describes that the Church of the Goddess of Night and the Church of the God of War are incompatible. Is it because their sequences are interchangeable at a high level? Based on this speculation, the mutual hatred of the 3 oldest churches, namely the Episcopal Church of the Storm, the Church of the Eternal Sun, and the Church of the God of Knowledge and Wisdom, can be explained to some extent, because their ways of sailor, singer, and reader can be interchanged in high order. Well, in the Pale Age, at the end of the last era, I'm afraid the main drivers of Death's fall are the Goddess of Night and the God of War. The captain's normal state at ordinary times, except for his bad memory, is not crazy at all, so the possibility of taking the vampire potion can be ruled out. Mr. Askey has recalled many things recently. Did creeping hunger really stimulate him? Klein nodded gently and continued reading. Alien is not the name of a race, but a description of many similar creatures. They are no different from human beings when they are normal, but there is always an instinctive, distorted, and repressed desire in their hearts. As long as they encounter the stimulation of a specific scene or something, they will break out, become monsters, and satisfy the desires of bloodthirsty and killing at will. When everything calms down, they will return to normal, and every time they break out, they will be ruthless, and eventually their hearts will be completely distorted. The most common and the only example I can recall is the werewolf. They are usually equivalent to human beings and cannot be recognized by most extraordinary abilities. But at the full moon, the twisted desire in the heart will intensify and the body will change accordingly. Your boss may be a hidden alien, and the death of his teammate inspired his nature. All the above are my personal guesses, because my memory is not complete and I can assure you that there is no other possibility. Maybe the precursor of your guess is out of control. No matter whether you take the vampire, potion, or belong to the alien itself, you can't save it. Of course, it has been speculated that the alien was originally a normal human being, but it was polluted by strange curses or evil spirits, so it will become different monsters under certain circumstances. In addition, I don't know if only the precursor out of control can be treated. I suggest you report directly to your boss's boss. I hope it's not too late. Putting down the writing paper, Klein looked at the desk with a dignified expression and thought for a long time. He had to admit that heterogeneous may exist, but the factors that are out of control cannot be ruled out. Can only wait for Ms. Daly's feedback. I sent the letter the night before yesterday, and she should have received it yesterday morning. If you reply in time, I can see it last night or this morning. It's almost noon. The little messenger dare not go near Cheney's gate? Or has Ms. Daly been delayed by other things? Klein shook his head, feeling that he was still very tired, so he leaned on meditation and forced himself to sleep again. In the misty world, he suddenly woke up and knew that he was dreaming. Then, he saw Dunsmith appear in front of him in a thin black trench coat. According to the normal dream reaction, Klein slowly played a call. "Good morning, Captain," done gently a moment to say. "Leonard found a clue in the process of tracking down the Langues case and needed your help. The secret spy sent by the temple will not arrive until tomorrow morning because the steam train is out of order." "Okay," Klein replied airily. Dunn thought for a moment and added, "You don't have to go back to Zotland Street. Just go to number 62 House Block and Leonard will wait for you there." "Thank you." As soon as his voice fell, Klein's dream was broken inch by inch, and his eyes subconsciously opened. House Block. Isn't this the block where the Divination Club, my classmate Welch, and the former member of the Aurora Society are located? There are so many things recently, one after another, just like something is brewing. Klein got up thoughtfully and slowly, went to the bathroom to clean himself up first, then put on a white shirt, brown vest, and black thin trench coat, took a semi-high silk hat, and went downstairs to the living room. It's less than 11 o'clock at this time, and Benson and Melissa haven't come back yet. Klein told Bella, the maid, that she didn't have to think about her lunch. Then, he arrived in House Block by rail coach and saw Leonard Mitchell, a midnight poet with messy hair in front of the house number 62. In the cold weather in September, Leonard is still wearing only a thin white shirt and a pair of beige trousers. His green eyes swept away. This is probably a house rented by Lannerwis under a pseudonym. "How did you find out?" Klein asked curiously. Leonard refers to his head. "Since you got a clue from Hood Eugen and suspected that Lannerwis might have something to do with the member of the Aurora Society. Cyrus Arippus, a cloth dealer. I can only change my mind and look for it from the Aurora Society when there is no gain from the normal investigation." The previous report showed that Silas had contacts with many residents in House Block. "I checked them one by one and found some problems here." "What's the problem?" Klein nodded slightly. Leonard raised his eyebrows. "Obviously, the tenants here rarely appear at ordinary times. After Heiners Vincent died, he declared that he would go to the South China to do business and never came back. His information was true, and the police found nothing. This can only be said to be a coincidence." Klein frowned. "Of course, it's just a coincidence, but when I asked the surrounding residents about the photo of Lannerwis, an old gentleman felt that it was very similar to the tenant of number 62, except for the glasses." Leonard took a black and white photo from his trouser pocket. "Why didn't you say?" Klein lamented, followed Leonard into number 62, House Block, and started divining whether there was a secret compartment or a secret room at his request, and as a result, there is. The hidden compartment or secret room of this house. Klein wrote a new divination sentence, sat down on the sofa, and closed his eyes while meditating. After 7 times, he entered the dream, and his eyes were hazy. In a gray world, Klein saw oak bookshelves, rows of books, one of which was taken away, and the horror ran on the surface of the wood next to it opened, and a secret compartment appeared. Pictures soon disappear. Klein opened his eyes and said to Leonard, "In the study." He wrapped up the topaz pendant, followed Leonard into the study, and saw the oak bookshelf he had just dreamed about. "Take out that book. There is a hidden space where it is covered." Klein pointed to the book on the far side. Here it is. I searched the whole house before and found nothing, so I had to go back to Zotland Street and ask for help. Leonard mumbled and walked over and pulled out the book Klein was referring to. He groped for a while, finally found the organ, and snapped open the secret compartment. There is a letter lying quietly in the dark box. Letter? Lanius hid a letter here? Klein is very surprised about this. He divined whether there were dangerous things in the letter, and when he got a negative answer, Leonard reached for the letter and opened the envelope without the address and the recipient. Taking out the writing paper, Leonard dumped it and unfolded it. Klein, close to the past, watching intently, I saw the first few paragraphs of the letter wrote. Ha ha ha, congratulations. Congratulations on finally finding this letter. This shows that you are not too stupid or too slow, and you are qualified to participate in the game of life and death that I designed. The child laborers who have been dying, the factory workers who have rarely lived for 10 years because of the environment and hard work, and the female workers who are at risk of serious illness and can only get a meager salary, I see that every factory is shrouded in countless grievances, making the surrounding areas depressed and dark. This is the worst era and the best era. Our game will begin in this context. Idiots, get ready. I'm going to give you a hint. P.S. Second, more monthly tickets. Also, push a friend's book, 9 Gods, which has a lot of words. He promised to invite me to dinner. At chapter 204 visitors. A third more for recommended votes monthly ticket. See here. Klein and Leonard will look up from the letter at the same time. Looked at each other, each muttered. I'm afraid this is a madman? Lannerwis is a hidden madman? Really crazy with paranoia and antisocial personality. Klein's mind turned, and his heart and hair were tight, so he threw his eyes back to the letter. Ladies and gentlemen, my hint is that I planted a bomb in Tingen, which will get stronger over time. Go find it and solve it before it explodes. If the game fails, the whole city of Tingen will be in ruins with a bang. Believe me, I didn't cheat in this matter. Lannerwis, who likes to surprise friends most. Bomb. Klein looked at Leonard, wondering to himself. Leonard aimed the letter at the sun, glanced at it over and over, and found no other clues. Bomb should be just a synonym. I have never heard of a bomb that can keep getting stronger. Klein frowned and thoughtfully replied, No, I mean, it may be a bomb in the mystical sense, such as some evil rituals that constantly accumulate power. Leonard tilted his head, as if listening to something, and his expression suddenly became dignified. His green eyes nodded in miniature. Maybe your guess is correct. Isn't there a description in front of this letter? The child laborers who have been dying, the factory workers who have rarely lived for 10 years because of the environment and hard work, and the female workers who have taken the risk of serious illness and can only get a meager salary are shrouded in countless factories with resentment. This may be the source of strength for Lannerwis's bomb, to continue to grow stronger. Yes, very likely. Klein's mood tensed. We must report to the captain at once. Leonard smiled and said, Don't be so nervous. You should know very well that Lannerwis is a swindler, and his description of not cheating may be deceiving itself. Of course, in any case, we have to go back to Zotland Street and tell the captain that it is best to apply to the temple and let them send an expert on occultism to find the position of the altar through the abnormal collection of resentment. You look very skilled, but why do you need help from Hood Eugen for similar altars and similar arrangements? What role can a psychologist play in this matter? Klein didn't object. He left number 62 House Block with Leonard and took a taxi back to Zotland Street. As soon as he entered the gate of Blackthorn Security Company, Klein saw 2 acquaintances, a plump one and a thin one, who were Senator Maynard's wife and sister. They still wear black skirts and hats, and cover their faces with a fine black veil. The 2 ladies were about to talk to Luoshan when they suddenly saw Klein coming back, so they turned around and were greeted by him. You really are the most elite people in this industry. Mrs. Maynard nodded gently and said in a low voice, I am very satisfied with the result and appreciate your style of doing things. You deserve it. The thin lady handed Klein a light brown paper bag, which contained thick stacks of cash, including 10 pounds, 5 pounds, 1 pound, 5 solars, and 1 solar. It comes to 230 pounds. The thin lady said simply. Klein didn't have the heart to pay attention to the problem of money now, so he immediately threw it to Luo Shan and said, "You give it to Mrs. Ariana." I don't think the two distinguished ladies can count the money wrong. This time, out of the corner of his eye, he swept Mrs. Maynard's copy of the Honest newspaper in Tianjin City, and there were two news items in the most distinctive position on the front page. The widow of the old baron died because she was involved in the murder of Senator Maynard. Mr. Dennis, the mayor, took the blame and resigned, apologizing for the deterioration of public security in Tianjin in the last 3 months. Mrs. Sharon's case has finally reached a consensus? I haven't had time to read the newspaper today. Klein nodded to the two ladies and followed Leonard through the partition to the captain's office. How about it? Did you find any clues? Dunsmith closed the file, raised his head and looked at Klein and Leonard with quiet gray eyes. I found a letter left by Langues. Leonard didn't describe it too much, and directly handed the letter full of madness and provocation to the captain. Dunn spread out the writing paper, glanced through it quickly, and finally rubbed his eminence. What a madman. He only has sequence 8, at most sequence 7. Klein sincerely agrees. Lannerwis is a dangerous person who is very destructive to social stability. Even if he is weak, he should not be underestimated. Then, he described himself and Leonard's guess exactly. Dunn touched his back hairline way. That's my idea, too. I'll send a telegram to the temple immediately and ask them to send occult experts to help. No one knows how dangerous the so-called bomb of Lannerwis is. We must be careful enough. When the temple gives me an answer, I will arrange the follow-up action. Klein and Leonard looked at each other and nodded at the same time. Okay. While the captain telegraphed the temple, Klein returned to the reception hall and took a copy of the Honest Man newspaper in Tianjin from Luo Shan. He stood in the partition position, absorbed in reading the previous two news. Mrs. Sharon, the widow of the old baron of Hoy family, was suspected to have something to do with the sudden death of Senator Maynard. The police department received a tip and went out at night and found that Mrs. Sharon and her accomplices stunned the servants and attendants and worshipped the devil in her bedroom. They refused to surrender and tried to resist, resulting in the death of a brave police officer. In the end, Mrs. Sharon and her accomplices paid the price of their lives for their evil cause. Mr. Dennis, the mayor, resigned due to the deterioration of the public security situation in Tianjin and announced that he would not participate in the election next year. In the next few months, Mr. Harry, the deputy mayor, will act as the mayor. A brave police officer. Is this the description of Cornley? Klein sighed and knew it was the best way to deal with it. According to the internal regulations of the Night Watchman, in order to guard against the revenge of evil forces on their families, even if they sacrifice, they cannot be praised by ordinary people. Silently folded the newspaper and put it back at the reception desk. Klein suddenly saw another visitor coming in at the door. She is also a lady, but she is not very old, at most in her early 20s, wearing a lotus leaf hat and a loose skirt, with a smooth forehead, long blonde hair, green eyes, and a melancholy and calm temperament. She is a pretty good beauty. The most striking thing about her is her bulging belly, which seems to have been pregnant for more than 7 months. Klein paused, feeling that he had seen the young pregnant woman somewhere. Suddenly, he heard Leonard stunned blurted out. Miss Megaeos? Out? Yes, the young girl who was cheated by Lannerwis. She was pregnant with Lannerwith's child, so she had some mental problems, saying that her child would hum songs and whistle when she was born. Klein suddenly realized that it was not surprising why Leonard knew Meg. When re-examining the people and things related to the Lannerwis case, the girl's photo was seen by every night watchman. Klein knew her earlier. At that time, Miss Christina of Menstruation, who was cheated out of her savings by Lannerwis, took her to the divination club to ask for help, and even asked if the baby in her belly was related. At this time, hear the sound of Leonard's Megao Osi looked at two people with slightly dull eyes and said politely, "Hello, Miss Megao Osi, what are you doing in our Blackthorn Security Company? Is there anything to entrust?" Klein stepped forward and asked. He was puzzled by the sudden visit of Megaos and thought it was a very, very, very coincidence. As soon as I found the letter left by Langues, Megaos came to you. Megao OC touched his belly and smiled. I don't know why. I suddenly want to come to Zotland Street, and I suddenly want to come up and have a look. Her mental problems are getting worse. Klein remembered that she didn't have time to open the second site last time and failed to confirm the status of MGO, so her teeth were lightly lifted and she was about to tap to the left at that moment. He suddenly froze and a stronger idea flashed through his mind. Can't look. Can't see.
Can't look.
It will die. If you see it, you will die. If you see it, you will die. Klein stood in situ like a statue, and his forehead was covered with cold sweat. It was as if he had had the deepest and heaviest nightmare, and he could hardly wake up. Suddenly, he understood one thing. That is, he didn't have time to open second sight last time, but his own spirituality sensed unimaginable dangers, which made him subconsciously slow down, missed the opportunity, and forgot the follow-up. At that time, Klein had not completely digested the soothsayer potion, and there was no promotion sequence 8. Spiritual prevention was subtle and difficult to detect, just like instinct made a habitual action, and he certainly wouldn't care too much. Now, the spiritual reminder based on the clown hunch is so clear and obvious. After more than 10 seconds, Klein finally broke out of a state of constant cold sweat, looked sideways at Leonard, and found that the Midnight Poet was also full of cold sweat and fear. Suddenly, Klein understood what Lannerwis called the bomb. It's the baby in Meg's belly. He left this baby. Klein instantly associated with the description in the letter and Hood Eugen's answer, and suddenly remembered a passage in Russell's diary. The Industrial Revolution that I started with my own hands, the steam and mechanical era that I created with my own hands, will become a hotbed for the birth of evil spirits. Klein's pupil contracted and thought of a possibility, but instinctively refused to admit it. No, this is not right. The baby in Magohio's belly is not the son of an evil god, or an evil god trying to be born, no. How could Hood Organ do such a stupid thing? Although his ability as a psychologist can really help Lannerwis hide Megaos, making her a tool of gestation in a semi-coma state, no. The resentment gathered by the premature child labor, the dead female workers, and the factory workers who can't live for 10 years is not helping the children of this evil god to grow up rapidly. No, don't look directly at God. P.S. It's Monday at the third watch. Please ask for recommended tickets and monthly tickets. Chapter 205 Emergency Arrangements. A monthly ticket. Klein subconsciously put his hands into his pocket, one holding the Yang Yen spell, and the other holding the Aztec bronze whistle. He is keenly aware that the cold but soft special touch of the latter has disappeared and seems to be being suppressed by invisible forces, while the former is still warm and reassuring. With this kind of peace of mind, Klein entered a state of semi-meditation, eliminating panic and no longer having any luck. He tilted his head, winked at Leonard Mitchell, and pouted at Meg. Then, relying on the ability of clown, he controlled his expression and smiled at Megao OC. Do you want coffee, black tea, or nothing? Megao OC stroked her belly, as if listening to something. A cup of warm water. I suddenly want to talk to you about Lannerwis. I feel that you know a lot. Who told you this? Leonard had long since lost sight of his usual idleness, and his smile was rather stiff. Megao OC suddenly interrupted and chuckled. My child told me. He knows a lot. He is very smart. Klein resisted the urge to swear, turned to the partition, and motioned Leonard to hold NGO'd. Leonard forced cock corners of the mouth on both sides, pointing to the sofa area. This is exactly what I want to say, and we also want to talk to you about Lannerwis. Roseanne at the reception desk looked at all this in a daze and confusion, and suddenly found that it seemed that nothing needed to be done by herself. Klein walked quickly through the partition, directly unscrewed the door of Dunsmith's office, and slammed it. He looked at the first surprise and then dignified Dunn. Sync a voice said, Captain, something is wrong. I know what the bomb that Lannerwis said is. Dunn brushed to stand up, pointing to the outside way. Megaos. He obviously heard Leonard's consternation, but he couldn't see the two players with cold sweat and fear. Klein ordered his head and explained very quickly. I tried to open the second sight to observe MGO's mental condition, but my spirituality prevented me from trying and kept telling me not to look. I will die if I read it. This reminds me of a sentence: don't look directly at God. Even if the baby in Megaeos's belly is not an evil god trying to be born, or an evil godson, it must belong to a mythical creature. Captain, when I think of the Black Altar in Hood Eugen's memory, his ability as a psychologist, and the tragic world described in Longueus's letter, I think my guess is probably close to the truth. Longueus got the ritual magic related to the true creator from the members of the Aurora Society, and with the help of Hood Eugen, Megaeos became the carrier of some kind of power, which will be used. Dunn seriously thought for more than 10 seconds and nodded with a dignified expression. I immediately asked the temple for help, hoping that the baby in Megaeos's belly could wait. Of course, we can't do nothing. You tell Leonard to hold Megaeos steady and try not to let her leave the company. Then you inform Mrs. Ariana and Luo Shan to let all the non-combatants evacuate. I will go behind the Chinese gate after I finish the telegram, and we must prepare for the worst. That is, the helper of the temple has not arrived yet, and the baby in Megaeos's belly is going to be born. As the captain of Tinjin's Market Value Night Squad, I have the right to use Saint Selena's ashes in a crisis. The ashes of Saint Selena, the ashes of the strong with high sequence, the seal core of Chinese Gate. Klein settled a little, and his thoughts turned. Captain, we can also ask for help from the Penalty Taker and the Mechanical Heart. They should have similar relics. Speaking of which, Klein suddenly flashed a light and muttered to himself. Lan Erwu case before belonging to the Generation of Punishment Processing. They just at that time a senior member out of control, I and old Neil to help deal with. Whispering, his voice suddenly became louder. Captain, please ask the Penalty Taker again, and ask them if the player who lost control before followed or monitored Megaeos? Do you suspect that he is out of control because of the pollution of the baby in Megaeos's belly? They were also in charge of the reinvestigation. Dunn solemnly replied, You can't delay any longer. Go to Mrs. Ariana and them. I'll take the time to send a telegram, first ask for help from the temple, and then send a telegram to the Scapegoat and Mechanical Heart, and ask them to find an excuse to evacuate the people around. Okay. Klein took a few steps outside and suddenly remembered one thing, that is, MGO's visit was so sudden and coincidental. Horan flashed across the red chimney house in my mind, and he turned back to Dunn's way. Captain, one more thing. Do you remember those coincidences I said? In the house opposite the kidnapping case, there are clues to the notes of the Antigone family. Riel Bieber did not escape from Tinjin in time. Heiners Vincent was exposed by a coincidence. Another member of the Aurora Society happened to meet me and lost his life directly. And so on. These coincidences are relatively hidden, which is hard to detect. Today, the sudden door-to-door visit of MGO OSS after we found Lannerw's letter is too obvious and too direct. This coincidence has been naked and undisguised. I think the one behind me may soon be on the stage. Also, why did Mrs. Sharon risk killing Senator Maynard? Is this also a coincidence? Dunn thought for a moment and seriously replied, I'll add this to the telegram. Strange changes after the death of the extraordinary. Dunn gray eyes deep continued. But unlike the extraordinary who are out of control, the extraordinary who died normally is no longer left with materials and objects. It is slightly equal to the potion, the corresponding sequence of potions, but it lacks certain auxiliary materials. Slightly equal to the potion, slightly equal to the potion. Klein's eyes shrank, and it was like a lightning bolt in his mind. So the endless darkness was illuminated. He suddenly understood a lot of things, and understood why the special way would not be broken when the materials were cut off. In addition to using substitutes, you can simply rely on the remains of the corresponding extraordinary people. This should also be one of the reasons why only finished potions are given in high sequence. Another reason is to prevent the formula from being leaked by such extraordinary means as divination and channeling. One guess after another comes to Klein's mind. Dunn looked at the door of the night watchman's recreation room and explained in a low voice. A few years ago. I don't remember exactly. At that time, I wasn't the captain of the Night Watchman's team. I stumbled across this problem, and after communicating with Daly, who had just become an extraordinary person for a long time, I immediately reported it to the temple. The temple asked me to keep it a secret and gave me two choices. Hee. This is also my explanation, not Daly's explanation. Whoever exposed it was responsible. The first choice is to pretend that I don't know, just like most night watchman captains and deacons, and continue to arrange the relics of extraordinary people after their normal death by the Holy Temple. The second choice is to give me a special and simple ceremony and corresponding skills so that I can directly eat those items produced by the accumulation of characteristics within a certain time limit. Well, this only applies to my own way, only to my own equal sequence and lower sequence. This will enhance my extraordinary characteristics and make my strength stronger. In terms of dream-related ability, I am not much worse than the corresponding sequence 6 now, which is why I dare to deal with Mrs. Sharon. Well, and this kind of thing. Klein exhaled slowly. He finally understood why he wanted to break his head before and couldn't think of a reasonable explanation. This is simply because of the lack of pre-knowledge, which can't be made up by brain holes. Well, it's in line with the so-called law of immortality of characteristics. Will it change from quantitative change to qualitative change if the characteristics are always aggregated like this? Klein's thoughts diverged, saw his one eye, done with a wry smile way. I chose the second development, but not to become stronger. I really want to be strong. Digesting the potion as soon as possible and getting promoted is the best and most direct way. Yes. Klein sincerely agrees. This gathering of the characteristics of equal sequences or lower sequences in the same way will not only enhance the strength, but also increase the risk of losing control, right? Dunn shook his head solemnly and said, "No, it's a legacy of normal extraordinary people, not out of control extraordinary people." Well, after knowing the acting method, I reviewed it again and found that it would increase the difficulty of digestion. Then why do you want to continue? Klein asked in astonishment. Dunn put his right hand into his pocket, trying to feel for his pipe, but found that he had left it in the office. He self-mockery shake head away. As I said just now, I didn't eat their relics to become stronger. Speaking of which, he paused, looking at the opposite side with a deep and remote blue gaslight, and said in a low voice, "They're all my companions. We have experienced many things together, and we have dealt with monsters and crazy cultists in the dark. Some people have saved me, and I have saved many of them. We walked in a quiet night. We fought in places that the public could not see. We fought against danger, and we guarded each other's backs. I am very reluctant to part with them. I remember that little Quit collapsed on the spot with fear after the first dangerous task, and began to cry. I remember Adelaide. He is Luo Shan's father. He used to help me block an evil curse with his arm. I remember that Dawn is a girl with a warm temperament like Dawn, always silently recording what everyone experienced. I remember that although Cohen Lee is not tall, she can play the lyre and sing a lot. I hope to continue to fight side by side with them, fight against monsters in the dark, execute all those crazy cultists, and protect Tingen City together, so I chose to take what they left behind." Dunn's gray eyes seemed to be shining, and his steadiness and his depth collapsed a lot at this moment. He corners of the mouth slightly upturned to continue to say, "In my dream, they are still with me. Adelaide likes reading and always stays in the sunroom to read books. He always asks me to discipline Luo Shan and make her mature quickly, so that Luo Shan always complains about how I look more and more like his father, and is always afraid of me. Little Quit is a restless person who goes hunting in the forest every day. Dawn always stands at her bedroom window and watches us chat. The newly joined Cohen Lee made one himself. Captain, Klein subconsciously whispered. He almost blurred vision, could not help but raise my hand and wiped my eyes and scolded one in my mind. Mom. Captain, you are lying to my tears, but I finally understand the reason why your acting is slow. Captain? Klein immediately sighed silently. It's a pity that old Neil died out of control. Otherwise, he would bring us a lot of joy. Dunn looked back, bowed their heads, and pinched the position between the eyes. After a few seconds, He raised his head and smiled bitterly. This is a selfish decision. I didn't know what Adelaide and Cohen Lee really wanted, so I made a selfish decision for them. I am really a selfish person. No. Klein suddenly shook his head. In the sofa area of the reception hall, Leonard looked at Megao Osi and grabbed a handful of hair, and his expression became stiff again. Megao Osi took the cup to drink water slightly testily and looked at Leonard with a little distortion in her face. I don't know why, I suddenly feel a little uncomfortable. Leonard Mitchell was about to answer when he suddenly saw Megahose raise her hand and grasp her own face. With a brush, she grabbed a piece of meat, a long piece of meat, and meat stained with blood. My face is itchy. Megao Osi smiled shyly, and her mouth cracked to the cheekbone, revealing Bison-san's teeth and bright red gums. XXXX. Leonard swore silently, feeling that the situation was deteriorating too fast. His lips moved. He listened to the side of his head, and his expression suddenly changed color and was livid. He managed to squeeze out a smile, for constantly grasping the face, constantly grasping the flesh and blood of Megao Osiwe. I'm going to the bathroom. Good of. The tone of MGO's silk became somewhat erratic. She touched her belly and said, My child. A little upset, Leonard didn't respond again. He stepped up and approached the partition. After entering the corridor, he deeply looked at the urn of the saint held by Dunsmith and sighed helplessly. Then, his expression became determined way. Captain, I'm afraid it's too late. We must immediately solve Megaos and the baby in her belly. Otherwise, the whole city of Tianjin will suffer huge losses. This is not something that can be avoided by evacuating the surrounding people. I know you have just sent such a telegram. Dunn frowned, unusually seriously asked, Are you sure the situation has deteriorated to this extent? Yes, in less than 3 minutes. Megaos will change, and her child will be born early. Leonard replied in a positive tone as he spoke. He glanced at the thick blood vessels wrapped around Klein's hand and said with a heavy voice, Seal, 2-105. Give it to me, I can play its role better. Good. Klein gave Leonard the vascular thief. Without hesitation, this is what he was going to do. Just then, Dunsmith tore off the neckline, patted the thin black trench coat, and spoke firmly. I'll go out with the ashes of Saint Selena first. You have 10 seconds. Remember, you will come out to fight after dozens of silences. At that time, no matter whether my condition is good or bad, you can't waste your time. Aim at Megaos and the baby in her belly and make your strongest attack. Say that finish. He turned in the past, holding the urn, tall and straight to the partition positioned. Captain. Klein gave a cry with dry lips. Captain. Leonard also shouted in a low voice. Dunn stopped, looked back and said with a gentle expression and a mellow voice, Don't worry about me. I'm not alone. Adelaide, Dawn, Little Quit, and Cornlay are fighting with me, no matter what dangers they face. He paused, gray eyes kindly looking at Klein and Leonard, two people. Don't be nervous. We are guarding Tianjin City. The corners of his mouth cocked up, revealing a smile that was no different from usual. Say that finish the sentence. He no longer stay. The line of sight to the outside, firmly through the partition, only the black knee-length trench coat slightly after yawned. Captain. Klein and Leonard shouted aloud at the same time and shed tears uncontrollably, but Dunn was not slow at all. We are a group of poor people who are always fighting against danger and madness, but we are even more guardians. 208th Zhang cries. Dee. The transceiver in the captain's office suddenly moved, and it seemed that a new telegram was about to appear. But Klein and Leonard can't tell any attention. They are red-eyed and silently counting the beating of the second hand. 10, 9, 8. At this time, Dunsmith entered the reception hall with a dignified expression, holding a square box like silver and bones in his left hand. His constantly torn off handfuls of blonde hair, grabbed a series of blood-stained Megao Osi, like what stimulation, suddenly stood up and raised my hand to Dunsmith, wearing a thin black trench coat, sharply shouted, You want to kill my child? You want to kill my child? Bang! Between this sharp and terrible voice echoed, Klein was like being hit hard on the head by a hammer, and Horan forgot to count silently, with a headache and dizziness. His eyes were instantly stained with blood red, and there seemed to be some liquid flowing out of his nose. Glancing at his head subconsciously, he saw Leonard Mitchell's eyes. Nose and mouth were covered with blood. His face was extremely pale, and his body was wobbly, as if he were about to fall. Eyes seemed to be the same. Klein suddenly recovered his thoughts, continued to count from the breakpoint, and jumped for 2 seconds. 5, 4. In the terrible sharp voice, Dunsmith's quiet gray eyes were covered with red silk, and all the lines were clearly seen. The blood vessels on his face are also highlighted, one by one like a poisonous snake, and there are gurgling chishui flowing out of his ears. But he didn't feel dizzy because of this. His right hand only paused for a second, and under the drive of strong willpower, he held down the urn of Saint Selena and opened the lid. There is extreme darkness inside, and there are bright grains of fine sand in the darkness. This scene presents fantastic beauty, just like the starry sky at night being put into a box. The surroundings quickly darkened, and the depth enveloped the whole reception hall, and countless black, cold, and greasy filaments were thrown in the air. They flocked to Meg and wrapped her almost instantly. This is not like spider silk, but more like the tentacles of an unknown creature. Mei Gao Oc's eyeball on the right was caught by herself, and it was attached to the bloody lace and hung under her eyes. She glared at Dunsmith and shouted, "You must die."
Bang!
Dun was thrown away by invisible forces and slammed into the opposite wall, causing the wall to crack and the bricks to fly. He pooped out a mouthful of blood, but his hand still held the urn of Saint Selena, holding it so tightly that it didn't fall to the ground. The countless black, cold, and greasy filaments are getting tighter and tighter, which firmly binds MGO's silk in place. No matter the flames suddenly rising with mildew spots, or the liquid full of blasphemy secreted by MGO's skin surface, it can't do any harm to it. 3, 2, 1. Klein and Leonard grabbed the partition at the same time, one holding a warm, thin piece of gold, and the other having wrapped the vascular thief around his left wrist, aiming at Megaoss and opening 5 fingers, almost no longer like a human. Megahose is struggling, with flesh and blood bulges on her left and right shoulders, which are mixed with blood vessels and veins standing out and round like a child's head. Above these 2 heads, cracks are spreading rapidly, and it seems that they are about to become eyes. Mei Gao Oc suddenly noticed the danger and opened her mouth wide, letting the corners of her mouth crack all the way to her ears. She wants to curse every enemy who wants to hurt her children with blasphemy. Just then, Leonard's 5 fingers of his left hand suddenly closed, and his wrist rotated half a circle. His pale face became the color of his liver, and the blood vessels on it became prominent, like tiny poisonous insects. The blasphemy of Megaos got stuck in her throat and came to an abrupt end. She seems to have lost the ability to speak and curse others at once. Klein seized this opportunity, spoke in a low voice, and spat out an ancient Hermes word. Light. I want light. There is light. He suddenly felt that the thin piece of gold covered with mysterious patterns in his palm became hot, and when he saw it, it gave off a harsh light, as if it had become a small sun. Then, Klein poured most of his spirituality into it, and through this Yang-Yen spell, at the imprisoned Megaos, the reception hall was bright. Deep and dark disappeared at the same time, and the thin black thread wrapped around Meg's rose snapped back, as if instinctively avoiding something, but Megaos saw the sunshine before she was free. I don't know when a big hole has been broken in the ceiling of Blackthorn Security Company, which runs through the roof on the 3rd floor, allowing the blue sky and the burning sun to shine in at the same time. The gold flake merged with the sunshine on the top of Megaos's head and immediately expanded, lighting a ball of light in the same place. Surrounded by countless balls of fire, boom, the whole house shook violently, and all the glass in the nearby streets broke. However, the power of the light ball is concentrated in the core position and has not dissipated much. It was wrapped around Megahose, and the light blinded Klein, Dun, and Leonard. Fighting back tears, Klein squinted and saw that the light had dissipated. The flame was still soaring, and there were many black ashes dancing around among them. Megaos and the baby in her belly have no trace, just like the coffee table, water cup, Newspaper and combination. Sofa in that area. Solved it? Get rid of the baby and his mother before the baby suspected of being an evil son really takes shape and is born in the real world? Klein can't believe it for a while. As far as his experience in playing games is concerned, this big boss can't be done so easily. Suddenly, his hair stood on end, and the hunch of clown told him that there was an extremely strong danger coming. Without thinking, Klein suddenly rolled out to the left. At this moment, the long and unusually sharp white osteotome with a handle arm split out of nowhere and emerged in midair, with an unusual aesthetic feeling. Its speed is so fast, and its posture is so hard to avoid. Brush. Klein's right chest clothes were split in two, his skin was split in two, his flesh and blood was split in two, and his bones were split in two. The wound is so deep that you can almost see his lungs. If he hadn't noticed the danger in advance and evaded it in time, this knife would have turned him into two pieces and killed him on the spot. But even so, Klein also appeared stagnation. Severe pain filled his head and drove his thinking away. At the end of the white osteotome, a figure was sketched out quickly. If it weren't for its high protruding belly, I'm afraid no one could recognize her as MGO. Her hair and dress were burned clean, her face and body skin were all blackened, and she was falling off piece by piece. Her nose was melted, leaving only two small black holes in its original position. Her eyes were missing, and a pale white flame was jumping in the sunken place. The protruding heads on the shoulders of Megao Osi were also burned, and her left arm became the white osteotome in her hand, which was rare and holy. Bang! When the floor shook, MGOSS ignored Dunn, Leonard, and the black, cold and greasy filaments that were rolled up again, and came to Klein with a flashing gesture. The white osteotome was aimed at the neck and was about to be cut out. Suddenly, she heard a voice with strong profanity. Yield! Leonard raised his left hand and locked Megaho's silk with his palm. The seal, 2-105, wrapped around his wrist changed from a thick, pale, red-stained blood tube to a dark red, swollen and bursting intestine. Just now, with the help of the vascular thief, he successfully stole the blasphemous words of Megaos, and now he is trying to control each other with their ability. Only the abilities with equal levels can have an effect. Influenced by blasphemy, Megawasi's waist was slightly bent, her legs and knees kept trembling, and her movement stopped. Countless black silk around her surged up like delicious prey, and Klein also seized the opportunity and rolled to another direction, leaving Ladisolic red blood all the way. However, he also eased from the severe pain, reached into his pocket, and took out the last Yongyan spell, take advantage of Meg's control again, and completely solve her. If she holds out until the baby is successfully born, the consequences will be unimaginable. Bang! Megao Osi's had exploded by itself, and her blackened skin and flesh were scattered, but her headless body got rid of the influence of blasphemy. Bang! Megao Osi's charred body turned into a shell, which hit Leonard at the speed of launching, but Leonard was temporarily stiff in place because of the forced destruction of blasphemy. At this time, Dunn Smith was still holding the urn of Saint Selena tightly. His face was unusually pale, and the cold black lines that were made were almost ready to encircle, which was about to blacken all the surrounding spaces. Bang! Megaos bumped into Leonard, knocked him into the wall, and the wall collapsed. Leonard's bones were cracked, his mouth was constantly bleeding, and he didn't even have the urge to struggle, so he went straight into a coma. Megao Osi raised a white osteotome, but the countless black lines that spread from Saint Selena's urn were wrapped up again, and she was tightly entangled and imprisoned in the same place. Klein had no time to care about his injury and took out the thin gold piece. Just as he was about to recite the ancient Hermes Sven mantra, a sudden voice rang out in the deep, dark and quiet room. Wow! That's the baby's cry. Chapter 209 Light. Wow! The baby in Meg's belly made a crying sound, wriggling to be born and trying to help her mother out of trouble. That black, cold, greasy thin thread seems to have been frightened, and it seems to have been caught by invisible forces, and they have regressed in succession. Wow! Dunn and Klein had obvious dizziness at the same time. Their throats tightened by themselves, their trachea was constantly compressed, and their breathing became difficult in an instant. Their noses, the corners of their eyes, and their ears are dripping with latticolic red, and all the capillaries seem to be cracked. If it weren't for Klein's delirium and roar before he entered the fog, if it weren't for Duns holding the ashes of St. Selena, they would have fainted, just like Leonard. Mitchell, Mei Gao OC's headless body turned around, facing Klein, charred to pieces of falling skin and flesh, and holy and rare white osteotome clearly caught each other's eyes. Klein, who just relied on rich experience to get rid of the influence, suddenly lost his scalp and forgot the pain in his right chest. It seems that he has seen the other person rushing wildly with a flashing gesture, and he didn't give himself a chance to recite mantras, instill spirituality, and throw out Yang Yen spells. Just as he was about to roll to escape, Klein saw MGO's sudden stagnation, saw Dun Smith's black windbreaker flying backwards, and saw the captain in front of him burying his head, and his back highlighted a thick, wriggling strip-shaped thing, just like there were poisonous snakes, tentacles, and monsters. Hidden below, Dun is using his nightmare ability to forcibly interfere with Megao's bang.
Bang. Bang.
Mei Gao Osi was just a struggle, and the thick strip-shaped things highlighted by Dun exploded at the same time. A large number of bright red blood splashed out, showering around every corner. For this result, the pale Dun was not depressed, because the blood was absorbed by the black thin lines made by the ashes of St. Selena. Absorbed, the countless cold, creamy, tentacle-like thin lines suddenly became violent, changed from retreating to advancing, and surged up, firmly entangled in Mei Gao Osi, and entangled in her hypertruding peristalsis abdomen. Opportunity. Klein is nervous and happy, and the ancient Hermes word for light has been brewed in his throat. Wow.
Wow. Wow.
The baby's crying rang again, more continuous and more urgent than before. Black, countless, almost invisible thin lines suddenly burst, like being struck by lightning, trembling and trembling for a cycling. Dun looked at this scene and found that Meg was about to get out of trouble. The expression on his face changed a little. He withdrew his right hand without any hesitation, opened his 5 fingers and plopped it into his chest. His left chest, his right hand quickly pulled out, covered with blood, and his 5 fingers clung to a heart with a feeling of peace at night and changeable dreams, a heart that was still contracting and expanding. Captain? Klein watched as Dun Smith stuffed the heart in his right hand into the urn of St. Selena, and his vision blurred quickly. Who? Who? Like the crying of the nightmare voice in the middle of the night. The countless black thin lines are tightened again with an unusually cold and quiet feeling, firmly and rigidly imprisoning Mei Gao Osi. Even if there is another baby crying coming from Meg's stomach, they are not loose, and even lock this terrible voice in their own package. Klein's tears mixed with blood trickled down, and a Gaherm's word was uttered in a low voice. Light. Light up the dark light. Bring warm light. Almost all his remaining spirituality was poured into the thin gold piece engraved with mysterious patterns, and his head was suddenly empty and dizzy. Summoning up his last strength, Klein threw out the Yang Yen spell and threw it at Mei Gao Osi, who was imprisoned by countless black thin lines. This time, those black lines did not retreat ahead of time, no longer followed instinct, as if they had been instructed by a willed burst. In St. Selena's urn, Dun's bright red heart is still beating. Sunlight once again penetrated the big hole in the ceiling, penetrated the whole 3rd floor, and shone into Blackthorn's security company, almost condensed into a substantial column. It was pulled by the Yang Yen spell and reflected to Megao's. The two merged on top of the headless monster and broke out like a sun boom in the blazing white brilliance. Klein closed his eyes and engraved the last picture in his mind. Mei Gao Osi lost her left arm, her head, and a lot of flesh and blood, and her charred body collapsed instantly. There was a certain semi-illusory and semi-real terrible thing in it, which no longer had realistic basis, and she could not complete the last step of transformation. She turned into black gas unwillingly and angrily and melted into light and flame. Boom. The whole house is shaking violently, but this is only the aftermath of the escape of the sun charm. Unlike a normal bomb, Its power is condensed and closed. Klein barely steadied himself and opened his eyes to look ahead after a few seconds. He saw a wall collapse, and he saw a circle of black where Megaho stood, and the floor was only half melted. He saw a blood-stained, curled up umbilical cord with traces of fire. He saw Dunsmith still standing in the same place in a thin black windbreaker. He saw the heart still beating slowly in the urn of St. Selena. He saw Leonard Mitchell lying opposite, dead or alive. Crane, who was very tired, was delighted, and it seemed that he could save the captain with ritual magic. He felt that Meg and the baby in her belly were really solved. No. The latter was closer to being interrupted and expelled. At this moment, Dunsmith turned his head and looked at Klein, with a gentle and relaxed smile on his pale face and a mellow voice as always. "We saved Tingen." After that, it was like he was back at the age of 20, and he was no longer so calm and serious about squeezing Klein's left eye. Klein's expression solidified on his face, and he saw the heart in the urn of St. Selena stop beating, turned into a bright spot, and dissipated around, and saw the captain's body leaning back and his hands loosed. All this is like a picture, but it is unstoppable. Knock. St. Selena's urn fell to the ground, just like Klein's heart. Gollum. Although the urn has never been covered, the deep darkness inside blocked the exit, so that the bright grains like fine sand did not fall at all. The box rolled and rolled to Klein. Dunsmith fell to the tattered ground, and his quiet gray eyes lost all their spirits, facing the hole where the sun shone. "Captain." Klein's line of sight blurred again. Want to shout aloud, but the word and subsequent words are stuck in the throat. "We also loathe to give up you." At this time, the urn of St. Selena rolled to his feet. Suddenly, Klein's chest ached, his pupils contracted, and the whole person stopped at the same place. He lowered his head and saw a slightly pale palm penetrating from his left chest, which was covered with blood. A Megabox isn't dead yet. No, the new enemy. The man behind this. Am I going to die? Klein's thoughts were wandering fast, his eyes almost lost focus, and his body fell sideways. His breathing gradually stopped, and finally, he only felt the palm of his hand jerking back. He only saw a pair of bright leather boots and a hand that leaned down a little pale. It holds the urn of St. Selena. In the dark, Klein lost all consciousness. Inside the ruined Blackthorn Security Company, there are burning marks and broken things everywhere, but there is no sound, just like a grave. After a few minutes, Leonard Mitchell's body moved and his eyes slowly opened. He straightened up with difficulty and looked around. He saw Dunsmith lying on the ground, his eyes wide open and Klein frozen in amazement. Both of them had obvious wounds on their left chest. No. Leonard squeezed a word out of his throat, and he stumbled and crawled to Dun, next to Klein's body. He kept verifying and going back and forth between the two, but in the end, he could only accept the unchangeable result. Leonard's legs went limp, and he knelt in the same place. His green eyes were full of pain. Drops of tears crossed his face, washing away blood and dust. He listened to the song for 2 seconds, then suddenly he fell down, roared, clenched his fist, and thumped on the floor. Knock. 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 Leonard kept crying and pounding on the floor, and there was more obvious hatred and self-loathing in his grief. Da-da-da. The sound of running quickly upstairs came. Leonard raised his head and saw the members of the Substitute Punisher and Mechanical Heart, who had just arrived with a vague line of sight. Chapter 210 story on the outskirts of Tingen, a house with a green lawn. It has a garden that began to wither in early September and a dark red chimney. There is a desk behind the bedroom window of this house, with an ordinary note spread out on it. A slightly pale hand turned the note to the original page, and then kept turning it back quickly. In the clatter of paper, the lines of words loomed. It is a logical coincidence that Regents, a member of the Priory, mistakenly sold the notes of the Antigonus family as ordinary ancient books because of the dual influence of fatigue and hallucination. Called by the blood of the Antigonus family, the notes quietly influenced its owners and moved to Tingen, where they fell into the hands of Cyrus Euripes and Heiners Vincent, members of the Aurora Society. After turning over the contents temporarily presented in the notes and copying the corresponding potions, both Cyrus and Heiners were worried that the esoteric practice good at divination would be traced back to themselves. After discussion, they decided not to take this risk and resell the notes to others. They didn't wait for Mr. Z's reply, which may be because the other party lives in Inmate Port. Through Cyrus' introduction, Heiners got to know Welch McGovern, a history student at Hoy University, and sold the Antigonus family notes to each other as ordinary ancient books. After that, Silas was attracted by the possible treasure of the main peak of Hornaches and began to go in and out of the DeVille Library and look through the corresponding materials. He didn't think there was any problem and left his real address and name, which was in line with his character. It was in this process that he got to know Lannerwis, who was looking at iron ore information and trying to carry out fraud. The madness and cunning hidden in Lannerwis made Cyrus appreciate it very much. He decided to develop the other side as a member of the Aurora Society. Of course, before that, the examination was inevitable. Cyrus secretly revealed the evil ceremony of praying for the true creator to drop his children to Lannerwis, but he knew that the other party's chances of success were very low because the ceremony was very difficult and the conditions needed were quite harsh, while the latter expressed strong interest and was very excited about the possible divine reward, and planned to complete the ceremony while preparing for the steel company. The cunning Lannerwis saw that there was something wrong with Cyrus Euripes, but he didn't expose the other side for his own purposes. He visited Hood Organ in the madhouse again. They have known each other for a long time and know something about each other. After a dark divination, the power of Antigonus family notes was completely awakened. Welch and his classmates died, and the survivor Klein Meridi, driven by the notes, sent it to Riel Bieber's home, which was a doomed ending. A lot of lines have been painted below, and then there is something new. What is puzzling is that Klein did not commit suicide afterwards and survived successfully for lack of sufficient reason. Through Welch's case, he met Dunsmith and joined the Night Watchman team. This is beyond in Sangwell's description, but it doesn't seem to affect the development of the story. Bacchus and his brothers had bad luck. They lost their last chip at the gambling table and owed a lot of debts. They decided to get some money and kidnap and blackmail a wealthy businessman. When they chose the last hiding place, they happened to take a fancy to the room opposite Riel Bieber's house. At this time, Riel Bieber has been attracted by the power of Antigonus family notes, hoping to digest the gifts of ancestors. However, being dizzy and in a semi-crazy state, he failed to make the best and safest choice. He abandoned his dead mother, but still stayed in Tingen, just finding a more hidden place to hold the digestion ceremony. It's really sad. If he was a little smarter, the story would become more complicated, but his choice was also in line with his state and implied logic at that time. Bacchus and others bought weapons, targeting Elliot, the youngest son of tobacco merchant Wicklow. In the end, they successfully kidnapped Elliot and brought him back to the opposite side of Riel Bieber's house. Clee, the old housekeeper of Wicklow, accepted the entrustment of his master and began to seek help from the security company. Due to the influence of Welch's death, the security company and the private detective industry were nervous. Kelly accidentally met a waiter who delivered food and happened to know the existence of Blackthorn Security Company. Leonard Mitchell and Klein accepted the entrustment and relied on the extraordinary ability to rescue Elliot quickly. Regrettably, Klein failed to find the clues of the Antigonus family notes hidden opposite. However, his spirituality reminded him in his dream that Tingen's market value night squad got the corresponding clues. The SEAL 2-049 arrived in Tingen, and with the help of this puppet of the Antigonus family, Dunsmith led the night watchman to find Riel Bieber, interrupting his digestive process. Riel Bieber became a monster, and the scene was out of control. In the end, Bieber, the monster, was solved with the skilled night watchman, but they immediately faced the attack of the members of the order. Many lines have been painted, making it difficult to see the original contents clearly. Leonard, who was hiding a secret, was about to let things end without doubt. Klein, who should have died, once again killed the members of the Order 7 inexplicably. It didn't affect the development of the story. Dunsmith came into contact with the notes of the Antigonus family and looked through its contents, which was a little hidden. Lanarwis, who finished all the preparations, bewitched Hudyujin and asked him to help him hold a ceremony to give birth to the children of the true creator by using his deceived fiancé Megeos as a carrier. Lanarwis has almost no possibility of success. The most serious problem is that even with the protection of ritual power, Megeos can't bear the intercourse with the illusory projection of the gods, which will make her die on the altar. At this time, the kind Nsengwil secretly helped Lanarwis. He separated half of the collected characteristics of the descendants of death and implanted them into Megeos's body at a certain time in advance. Hudyujin put Megeos into a semi-coma and made her regard the illusory projection of the true creator as Lanarwis. Under the nourishment of the resentment accumulated day and night in the factory area and the substantial darkness and depression, the ceremony was successful, and Megeos became pregnant with a son of the true creator. The gods saw the coincidence of things, but he did not refuse to break through the blockade of the seven gods. Hudyujin is infected. After the success of the ceremony, the crazy Lanarwis came to his senses. He knew very well that if the children of the gods were really born in the real world, he would become one of the sacrifices. How could a mortal become the father of the children of the gods? This is a great blasphemy. Lanarwis decided to leave Tinjin early and told the night watchman, the penalty taker, and the mechanical heart about this bomb so that they could solve the future trouble for themselves. Crazy always pays the price. But Lanius didn't write directly to those extraordinary teams. He thought it would make him look like an idiot. He decided to leave the letter in a rented room and pretend to be playing a game with the official extraordinary. For this reason, he didn't remind Hudyujin of the infection problem and took all the gains. To be on the safe side, he also informed Cyrus Aripes in a safe way, who didn't believe it, but felt the possibility of success. Selena would accidentally and coincidentally saw the real mantra of magic mirror divination from her occult teacher Heiners Vincent. Her bold attempt happened to meet Klein Maridi, who successfully solved this extraordinary case that could cause heavy casualties. The Night Watchman team found Heiners Vincent by this, but the Aurora has just been rewarded for its success, so Dunsmith happened to see the clear image of the true creator in his dream and suffered great harm. But he didn't get infected because of it, which would be noticed by the top of the Night Watchman. This injury made Dunsmith more seriously infected by the secret notes of the Antigone family, and the symptoms of trance and omission were strengthened. He will meet the requirements of Nsengwil step by step. Many lines have been crossed out again. It's unbelievable. Klein Maridi sensed the hidden influence of Nsengwil and saw the dark red chimney. This is because Ask, a teacher in the history department of Hoi University, reminds me that he hides many secrets. Even so, Klein can find specific clues, which is surprising enough to be unexplained. Whatever the reason, Nsengwil didn't stop his action and the story goes on. Klein ran into Cyrus in the library and couldn't keep his hand to kill each other, so the clue of Lanius was broken in half, and the discovery of the problem was delayed and postponed. Klein met Megeos, but spirituality prevented him from seeing it, and he didn't notice the subtle abnormality afterwards. This is very logical. Our story is not made up. He has collected information about the red chimney, but he always chooses a route that does not contain the target. Maybe he will wait for 2 or 3 months and wait until the last batch before he can find the real red chimney house. Line after line of text has been blotted out, which is more than the previous. Dunsmith's problem has been alleviated. His condition is obviously improving. He actually mastered the playing method. Klein Maridi taught him this, and he found inspiration from the examples of Daly, Simone, and Neil Sr. No, and Nsengwil didn't believe it, but he could only change his original plan slightly. The story has a new wave. Ask decided to go to Backlander in order to find the memory of the past. It didn't take long. Klein and Dunn got a clue from Hudyujin. Mrs. Sharon decided to take the risk of killing Senator John Maynard in order to completely oppose the Conservative Party and the new party in Tinjin, and to vent her accumulated madness after changing her body. Her reasons are not sufficient, her motives are not strong enough, but she still acts. Everyone is not awake enough. She is at such a stage, and she has sufficient confidence in not being discovered. Senator Maynard's wife found the Blackthorn Security Company through the tobacco dealer Vic-Roll. They did not live up to the entrustment and soon discovered Mrs. Sharon's abnormality. Dunn, who is close to the strength of Sequence 6, decided to take the initiative and give the seal 3-0271 to Cohenly for use. The two of them returned to Mrs. Sharon with Klein, and Dunn tried to control the target by dragging people into dreams remotely. There is nothing wrong with this, but unfortunately, Mrs. Sharon happened to put the idol of the original witch next to it. So, the Night Watchman's plan failed, and Cohenly took photos of himself and saw himself nervously. Mrs. Sharon was solved, and Cohenly died. Dunn blamed himself very much and took the extraordinary characteristics left by the other party according to the usual practice. His digestive process was interrupted, and his mental state became quite unstable. In this case, Leonard and Klein found the letter left by Lanowitz. Megaeos was inexplicably summoned to Zotland Street and entered Blackthorn Security Company. The baby in her belly was in a critical period and failed to stop her impulse. Dunn made a detailed arrangement and made a correct arrangement, but he did something wrong. If he made up his mind to solve Megaeos immediately, he'd better introduce the other side into Cheney's Gate and fight with the advantages of environment and objects. If he is going to wait for help, he must never take out the ashes of Saint Selena. It's a pity that Dunn, who was in a bad state and in a trance recently, failed to think of a crucial point, which can make people unconsciously act according to its description. This is the reason for the coincidence? If that's the case, 0-08 is really terrible, and even Maigawasi, who is pregnant with Ahriman's children, has followed its arrangement. It's no wonder that the 0-level seal is very dangerous, with the highest degree of attention and the highest level of confidentiality, and it is not allowed to inquire, spread, describe, or spy. Klein stopped tapping on the edge of the table and made a divination for the guests just now. Unfortunately, the information was incomplete and failed. See, the time has passed for several minutes. He intends to return to the real world as soon as possible, so no longer divergent thoughts, wrote the penultimate divination statement, the city wherein Sangwil is currently located. Because of the existence of the seal 0-08, and because Insangwil should have become a demigod, Klein can't directly predict the specific position of the other party, so he can only enlarge the scope and make a vague inquiry. Of course, if there is no mysterious space above the fog to eliminate interference, even if the inquiry is vague, he will certainly fail in divination and get no answer. Relying on the high-backed chair, Klein recited the divination sentence for 7 times, and once again entered the dream and entered the gray world. The gray world suddenly cracked, and a rushing, spacious, and slightly turbid river appeared. There is a magnificent bridge over the river, and there are docks one after another on both sides. The goods are busy, and there are many workers. There are rows of houses on the northeast bank of the river, most of which have the characteristics of the current architecture of Ruined Kingdom, such as polygonal 4-slope roofs, protruding belly windows, and no veranda facing the street. Besides, there are many Gothic buildings that people come and go in the streets here, carriage after carriage, and sometimes strange machinery can be seen at the farther east. The more chimneys there are, the more smoke there is, and the farther west, the higher the terrain. The houses that are gray-blue, off-white or light yellow are coiled up, surrounded by gorgeous palaces and a towering Gothic bell tower. When the bell echoed, and Klein woke up and knew which city he had just seen. Land of Hope, capital of all cities, Backland. P.S. I'm surprised. How did such a big paragraph disappear after P.S. at noon? Well, it mainly means that you can guess the ability and limitation of 0-08. After the first part, I will publish some information to see if you can guess a few correctly, all of which are inferred from the previous content. Chapter 213, take a look again. Zangwil went to Backland. I don't know how long he will stay there. Well, you can confirm it every once in a while. Klein leaned forward thoughtfully, erased the contents on the surface of the parchment, and wrote a new divination statement. The current position of Lanrius. In his view, Insangwil was undoubtedly the chief culprit who caused the captain and others to die and almost fell asleep forever, But Lannerwis, a madman, was also an accomplice who could not shirk his responsibility and must pay the price of blood for it. After 7 times of meditation, Klein once again entered the dream. But the picture presented after the gray world cracked was exactly the same as what he had just seen. Wide, slightly turbid rivers, one pier after another, row upon row of houses, various buildings dominated by ruined trend and with mixed Gothic style, crowded streets, bustling scenes, chimneys constantly spraying fog, magnificent palaces, towering an iconic Gothic bell tower. Lannerwis is also in the land of hope, and the capital of all cities, Backlinde. Klein opened his eyes, slightly puzzled, because he wanted to divine the specific location of Lannerwis. But the result was still only a very large and vague range. This shows that the sequence of Lannerwis is much higher than I expected. No, it may also be that he has gained great benefits in the process of helping the true creator to descend his children, for example, a little divinity, for example, the umbilical cord-like item similar to the baby left in Maegao Osi's belly, while the latter was mostly taken away by Nsengwal. Klein's thoughts turned sharply and whispered to himself. After confirming the vague position of the two enemies, he considered a realistic problem. That is, he has no strength to retaliate at present. Even if Lannerwis only has sequence 7 or even sequence 8, he is not easy to deal with, and he is obviously good at cunning. The strong who are worse than themselves belong to normal operation. Nsengwal is even more horrible. He is a demigod of sequence 4 and has a terrible 0 seal. Although my crossing still hides some secrets, it obviously cannot be transformed into combat effectiveness, maybe for a long time. During the thought churning, Klein decided to add a divination. Considering the language, he solemnly wrote, "My hope of becoming strong." Gently put down the pen with a round belly, Klein leaned back and closed his eyes while meditating. He fell into a deep sleep with the help of meditation. In the gray world, he once again saw what he had just witnessed: rivers, docks, chimneys, crowds, palaces, all kinds of machinery and Gothic bell towers, and Backlinde, the capital of ruined kingdom. Then, the picture changed, and he saw a towering mountain peak penetrating into the white clouds, a magnificent and ancient palace, the first huge chair carved by Zhang Shirtu and inlaid with dim gems and gold, and a strange vertical pupil composed of countless mysterious symbols. Silently, the scene is broken, and Klein slowly sits up straight and reaches out and taps the edge of the bronze long table. Backlinde has the hope that I will become stronger. The second scene refers to the main peak of Hernaki's mountain, and refers to the treasure left by the Antigone family. The strange vertical pupil, which is composed of countless mysterious symbols and handed to me after the notes of the Antigone family polluted the Doom Muppets, is the key to everything. One by one, Klein decided not to rush to the Hornachi's mountains, where the hidden danger is so high that the demigods in sequence may not be able to bear it. So, let's go to Backlinde. Klein sighed, made a decision, wrapped himself spiritually, simulated the feeling of falling, and left this mysterious space above the fog. Back to the real world, he slowly walked out of his hiding place and returned to Dunsmith's grave. Looking deeply at the photos and inscriptions on the tombstone, Klein slowly drew a crimson moon on his chest, and then turned and walked outside the cemetery. As a night watchman, he has to patrol Raphael's cemetery from time to time. He is very familiar with the law of the gravekeeper's actions and the surrounding environment. Without causing any disturbance, he easily left the quiet and deserted area and walked along the rammed earth-paved road, with the help of the shadow of trees, to the downtown area of Tingen. The night is so peaceful, the red crescent is so dreamy. Klein walks alone, and his thoughts spread aimlessly like a runaway horse, sometimes thinking about revenge plans, and sometimes recalling the captain's unreliable memory and the sadness hidden under old Neil's humor. Unconsciously, Klein walked into the nearest street like a wandering soul and turned a fork in the road. It was 2 hours later when he completely got rid of that state and completely grasped his own attention. He found himself standing in Daffodil Street, opposite the home he shared with his brother and sister. Instinctively, Klein came back here. Slightly delighted to take a step forward, he suddenly paused, with a bitter smile, self-deprecating whispered. If I knock at the door in the past, Melissa will probably faint. On the spot. Benson should be nervous and start to lose her hair, and then try to convince me calmly, in the name of the curly baboon. Shook his head. Klein took a deep look at the familiar door and walked in the direction of Iron Cross Street. It's all right. What I want to do in the future won't involve them. The pension given by the night watchman team and the police department must be enough for them to live a stable middle-class life. Even if Melissa doesn't find a job, Benson is unemployed. After walking silently for a while, Klein began to feel tired, but as a dead man, he had nothing but clothes, topaz pendants, and Aztec copper whistle, including gold pounds, including cellar and pennies. Should I blow the bronze whistle and send a letter to Mr. Askey to help me quickly? Klein took pains to laugh. Come on, don't contact him for a while. Maybe Nsangwil is still watching him in the dark, and when the time is right, I'll find him again. As an old monster who has lived for thousands of years, he should be able to understand such a thing as coming back from the dead. Well, it's not too cold tonight. Just find a place to make do with sleep. Because of too many recent events, he hasn't had time to do the follow-up experiment of sacrifice, and the 300 gold pounds in the anonymous account are still intact. It's enough to support my expenses for a long time. I'll buy a newspaper tomorrow to make sure what day it is. Miss Justice, they don't have any new prayers, which means I haven't missed the party. Klein thought and found a sheltered corner, sat down, took off his coat, covered it with it, and fell asleep with his back against the wall. Not long after sleeping, he was suddenly woken up and saw a policeman with a short stick. There is only one V on the epaulets, and the policeman at the bottom. Klein took a glance and confirmed the identity of the other party. The police officer called out, "You can't sleep here. Streets and parks are not places for you lazy and unwilling vagrants to sleep. This is the provision of the poor law."
Is it?
Klein paused because of his sensitive identity and didn't argue with each other. He took his coat and walked in the street again until dawned soon. He lowered his head and entered the Tingen branch in Backlander, where he opened an account. He took out £200 in cash with the preset password and left the remaining 1/3 in the deposit. He stayed in the account to guard against accidents. When writing the ancient Hermes mantra as a password, Klein undoubtedly heard the prayer. Next, he spent a total of £38 on 2 suits, 2 shirts, 2 trousers, 2 pairs of leather boots, 2 bow ties, and 4 pairs of socks, as well as 2 double-breasted woolen coats, 2 solid-colored sweaters, and 2 thick trousers for winter. In addition, there is a walking stick, a wallet, and a leather suitcase. That after all this, Klein found a hotel to take a shower and change clothes. Then, in order to avoid possible acquaintances, he took a taxi directly to the steam train station in Tingen and bought a newspaper on the way to confirm that it was Sundayed from Tingen to Backlander. It only takes about 4 hours by steam train. The luxury first-class seat is £0.75, that is 15 souls, and the second-class seat is 10 souls, £0.50. The third-class seat, which is very crowded and in poor condition, is quite cheap, only 5 souls. Klein thought about it and bought the 2 o'clock flight in the afternoon. Second class, holding a ticket and a suitcase. Klein casually found a place to sit down in the waiting room, and it was only early 9 o'clock in the morning. He is very glad that there is no strict household registration management system in the Kingdom of Ruan. He can prove his identity with 3 months of running water, gas, and rent bills, and it is even simpler to buy a steam train ticket. Just give money. Sitting in the waiting hall, I thought that I would leave Tingen City in the afternoon and go to Backlander, the capital. Klein's heart suddenly felt a little empty. He thought of the sister who lived the mother's feelings, his brother who liked to tell sarcastic jokes, and the scene where 3 people were so full and collapsed in their positions that no one wanted to move. Scene after scene. Klein gave a sudden laugh, which made him feel uncomfortable, because he thought of Melissa, the turtle known as the doll, and Benson's poor hairline. He suddenly had a strong impulse to see his brother and sister again. Only then did Klein understand why he didn't choose an earlier train and bought the 2 o'clock one in the afternoon. He carried his leather suitcase, quickly left the waiting hall, and took a taxi back to Daffodil Street. Then, he hid in the shadow of the opposite house and looked at his own door. He tried several times to cross the wide street, Klein stared at the opposite side and felt homeless. When he first crossed, he felt similar. Suddenly, he saw the door open and Melissa and Benson came out. One of them is wearing a black skirt, a black gauze hat, a black shirt, a black vest, black trousers, a black coat, and a black hat, with the same callous expression and low mood. Melissa has lost weight. Benson is so haggard. Klein's heart is sour and he opens his mouth, but he can't shout out those two names anymore. He unconsciously followed Benson and Melissa to the nearest municipal square, where he saw tents set up and a new circus performing. Benson paid for the tickets, took Melissa into it, forced out a little smile way. This circus is very famous. Melissa, no expression, place a brief nod. Suddenly, her foot slipped and her ankle was slightly crooked, and she was about to fall. Klein, who followed the ticket, opened his mouth, trying to hold his sister, but he could only retract his subconscious outstretched hand and stood helplessly not far away, standing in the crowds coming and going. Benson was so startled that it was too late to help, but Melissa quickly stood firm, sipped her mouth, and said nothing. At this time, the clowns poured in. Some performed on the wheels of the carriage, some crawled on the huge ball, some threw tennis balls into the sky and caught them with funny movements. Melissa looked at these performances and looked as if the other party didn't exist. Benson tried several times and cheered loudly, but she couldn't arouse her sister's mood, and she slowly sank. Klein pursed his lips and looked at the scene from a distance, wanting to get close but afraid. Suddenly, he felt the wallet in his pocket and had an idea. Benson and Melissa moved on, watching the performances in silence. After a while, they saw a clown painted with red, yellow, white, and other colors running over, first throwing tennis balls into the sky, and then when people's attention was attracted to the air, a bunch of flowers and a bunch of Seville chrysanthemums came out of nowhere. This bunch of flowers came to Melissa and Benson's eyes, golden in color, symbolizing happiness. Melissa and Benson looked blankly at the clown opposite, only to see his face full of red, yellow, and white paints, and his mouth tilted high, with a happy smile, a grandiose smile, and a funny smile. Fix. End of the first part, the first summary, and leave first of all. Thank you for your reward and subscription since it was put on the shelves. I should have made a speech at the end of June, but I thought that the first book would be finished soon and I could write it together, so I waited until today. This man in his 30s, his energy, especially in his mind, has really dropped a lot. At that time, I wrote 5 chapters a day at most, 15,000, just like beating chicken blood. But since the late I have almost 3 chapters a day at most, and this is in the case of thinking about plots and writing stories besides sleeping and eating, resulting in abnormal mental states such as anxiety and depression. That therefore, we can only compromise with physical and mental conditions. 1 chapter in the morning, 1 chapter in the afternoon, rest a night, keep healthy, and then keep 2 copies of the manuscript to ensure that the update is on time. Avoid anxiety, be in good condition, and have a smooth thinking before considering writing 3 chapters. For the overtime in June, I can honestly say that I saved my life by saving manuscripts. For a whole month, I didn't spend more than 4 days writing 3 chapters, and everything else was supported by saving manuscripts. Finally, saving manuscripts fell to the bottom line of 2. Well, I can only say with confidence that we can win by quality. After the update, it is the summary of the first book. Basically, everything that should be expressed has been expressed. The title of Clown runs through the whole situation. Hey, you can go back to the shelves and give a speech. As I said, the various structures of this book are the most comprehensive ones I have considered.
You will wait and see.
Well, I think it is still qualified that I have adopted a writing method that I have never tried before. That is, I write a short story as a short story and all the foreshadowing and layout ideas are considered as a whole. Of course, the foreshadowing of the full text will definitely remain. In short, judging from the current effect, the attempt is still successful and gratifying. On characterization, I won't say much lest I be sent a blade. Of course, there must be some dissatisfaction. First, when the party, event, practice, and daily life began to show a fixed trend, my writing feeling declined, and I believe my reading feeling was the same. Therefore, I tried to jump off the timeline, and after jumping it was rather rough at first, but it gradually improved. Second, after the death of old Neil, I tried to jump off the timeline secretly, I ordered 6 to 8 books, and the title of each book will be the name of the cereal potions. But it is not necessarily the way of Soothsayer by Chloe, but mainly depends on the theme or metaphor of this book. Finally, after the first part, as usual, I have to ask for leave to rest, sort out the outline, find the starting point of the second part, and scrutinize the general plot. Well, I will rest for 1.5 days and resume the update at noon the day after tomorrow. Besides, I will update some information of 0-08 on Weixing Gongzhong, and don't put it on the works, for fear that new readers will see it, so that the first part will lose half of the fun. By the way, the second part, Faceless Man. Please look forward to it also. After self-praise and self-criticism, shouldn't everyone be encouraged by the monthly ticket?